Hello, everyone. While they're queuing up our start slide, I want to get us started because we don't want to make the rest of the schedule late today. We're the lead off for the U.S. Climate Action Center. My name is Sarah Sutton. I'm the CEO of Environment and Culture Partners, which is a nonprofit in the U.S. accelerating climate action in the cultural sector. I want to thank a whole bunch of people behind the scenes who've done work for us today. So my managing director, Stephanie Shapiro, is back home handling that part. And we have Allison Fagins-Turner and Hannah Greenfelder here from All In and Climate Nexus, the other way around, helping make this work. And thanks to America is All In for hosting us here today. That's the World Wildlife Fund, it's RMI, it's Ceres, it's America's Pledge, it's WRI, it's Bloomberg Philanthropies that makes this possible, and we really appreciate the platform. So today, we want to tell you what the cultural sector is doing. Where am I pointing? There we go. We go back one. I want to tell you what the cultural sector is doing to accelerate climate action. So I'm going to tell you about 3 cross-cultural sector projects, and then my 3 super colleagues here are going to tell you about projects that are taking place at their institutions. I'm going to focus on carbon, because that's what I'm motivated to do and have the most ability to have an impact on. They're going to talk about carbon and public engagement impacts at their museums. So every time a museum professional walks through a museum, she can imagine her carbon impacts. She looks at the exhibit, she looks at the theater, she looks at the conservation lab, and if she's at a zoo or a garden, she looks at the vet hospital, and she looks at the garden management process. She's at a historic site, she thinks about managing that historic building, and she sees carbon everywhere. We know that we have significant impacts. Every time that same museum professional engages with the public in an exhibit or program, she creates a partnership to generate clean energy, or she plans community resilience, she's taking climate action. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 projects. 2 of them are federally funded. 1 of them is privately funded. The first one is the one that you see here on the screen. It's funded by the Biden-Harris administration's Institute for Museum and Library Services. They contributed $600,000 this fall for 2 years for 148 museums to do climate energy work. We're partnering with New Buildings Institute to do the science behind the data, and we're partnering with the New England Museum Association to reach out across the sector. We're going to take 148 buildings, all of their energy data, and we're going to create energy sensitivity models for zoos, gardens, and 5 different types of museums, so that anybody who uses this free software is going to be able to understand where they can have the greatest impact on reducing their carbon footprint right away, without needing to hire talent just to get going. That project is an example of what federal leadership can do when the administration allocates funding for climate action projects. Now this one that I want to talk about, this is a piece of art by Helen Frankenthaler. The Helen Frankenthaler Foundation in New York City wanted to commit $5 million to help visual arts museums do energy efficiency and clean energy work over 2, maybe 3 years. And they weren't quite sure how to do it. And this is one of my favorite We Are Still In stories. Well, We Are Still In is what we were before. Now we're America's All In. This came about because Frankenthaler Foundation reached out to Rocky Mountain Institute, part of America is All In order to get energy back up on this project. Rocky Mountain Institute reached out to me, Environment and Culture Partners, because I organized the cultural sector for America is All In. And together, we created this Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. In January, we put out a proposal, request for proposals. In 6 weeks, we had over $7 million in applications, 110 grant applications. Remember, we had $5 million to spend over 2 to 3 years. The projects were so good and so ready to go that the board decided to fund 5.1 million and 78 projects right off the bat in the first year. And then they stepped up with another 5 million over the next 1 to 2 years to do more of the same work. The visual arts sector is 25% of the 35,000 museums we have in the United States. Think if we had funders and partners who helped us do that with every sector, with science museums and with public gardens, with zoos and historic sites. So we've had a federal funder, a private funder. I'm going to give you one quick one on a more federal funding, but lower scale. Those two first projects were huge, right? All the way across the country, 78, 148 institutions. There's something called STITCH, Sustainability Tools in Cultural Heritage. It's hosted at the American Institute for Conservation, funded by the Obama administration National Endowment for the Humanities. And it helped us do life cycle assessment and carbon calculation for all the things that that museum professional does when she creates an exhibit, cares for objects, packages an object and ships it to another museum to be exhibited. She can go online and use the carbon calculator and figure out among all the tools and resources she'll use which ones will have the least carbon impact. So even a regular staff member without a leader who's joined America is All In and is driving the climate fight can take climate action. It's right at her fingertips every day. So we try to scale to every level, and we try to reach every single part of the sector. So now I'm going to hand it over to Patrick Hamilton, who's going to talk to you about his work.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of you who are attending this session, whether it's in person, virtually, in real time, or later on at your own convenience. I'm Patrick Hamilton, and I'm the Director of Climate Change, Energy, and Environment at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And I also represent the cultural sector on the advisory committee to America is All In. And I want to tell you a story about the Science Museum of Minnesota as a way of exemplifying and amplifying the messages that Sarah just provided about the importance that the cultural sector could contribute to accelerating climate action and justice in the United States. So my story is in 3 chapters, and chapter 1 starts in 2010, which is when the Science Museum contracted with a consulting mechanical engineer to do a top-to-bottom energy analysis of our institution. Several months later, he came back with his report, and his top-of-line message was this: the Science Museum of Minnesota, like all large modern buildings in the United States, uses a lot of electricity. And electricity inevitably degrades into heat. And according to his calculations, all that electricity coursing through the Science Museum on an annual basis degraded into over 20 billion BTUs of heat energy. And we said, well, okay, that sounds like a big number. And he said, well, it is, and you are ejecting all that heat energy from the building. And we said, well, yes, because that's how we design, construct, and operate large modern buildings in the United States. But he said, you're throwing that heat energy away, and then at the same time, you are buying an enormous amount of heat. Why? And we said, well, because no one had ever laid it out to us in those terms before. So we asked him, what actually should we do about this ridiculous situation? And he said, well, I recommend that you install machines that will allow you to capture and reuse the heat energy that you are throwing away. And we said, that sounds exciting. Can we see an example of what you're proposing? A real working example. And he said, well, unfortunately, no, because I can't think of a building in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area that is actually doing what I propose that you do. But he said, I did a retrofit of a large industrial facility employing the same principles that I think that you should apply. So we implemented a field trip. We drove an hour south to a large food processing plant, actually a bean cannery, and actually toured this facility, and it was very impressive because before the retrofit, they'd literally been dumping enormous amounts of energy and water down the drain. And this engineer had rerouted that heat energy back to the front of the processing plant, and as a result, they were saving a tremendous amount of energy. Now, it cost them a lot of money to do this retrofit, but the payback was not in years, it was in months. So I approached the plant manager and I said, this is an amazing story. I would like to work with you to tell that story. And he was unenthusiastic. And I was taken aback, but I realized eventually why he was unenthusiastic, because it's not an educational facility. They had identified a problem, they'd hired an engineer who'd proposed a solution, they'd implemented it, and now they're back to canning beans even faster, more efficiently than ever before. And frankly, he said to me, you know, I now think that we are operating the most efficient bean cannery in the United States that gives us a big market advantage, and as long as no one else knows what we're doing, that's all the better for us. So, chapter 2, the Science Museum goes back and we implement an advanced heat recovery of the Science Museum in 2015. Now, our payback wasn't in months. We spent $900,000 and we're saving $300,000 a year for a payback of 3 years. And we cut our carbon budget by 30%. Now, the third chapter of the story is what we did after the retrofit, because in some respects, the retrofit was not the end of the story, but it was the beginning. We had articles written about what we did. We've had videos produced about it. We've had media stories broadcast about it. We took interpretive graphics and put them into our mechanical room in the basement of the Science Museum for the tours of hundreds of architects and engineers, building owners and operators, policymakers, property developers, and opinion leaders who've toured Science Museum's advanced heat recovery retrofit in recent years. I tell this story about the Science Museum because that's what cultural institutions do. We tell stories, and because we tell stories better than almost anyone, we are some of the most trusted institutions in the United States, and also, consequently, some of the most popular. We garner hundreds of millions of visits annually in the United States. So the cultural institution category is an enormous, yet untapped potential for accelerating climate action and justice in the United States. And I greatly admire the pioneering work that the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation has done by setting up the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. Because here, as far as I know, for the first time, is a fund to allow visual art institutions to invest in energy efficiency. But the cultural arts institutions, as Sarah pointed out, are just one of the wedges of all the cultural institutions in the United States. I can't think of an art, cultural, historical, natural history, or science institution in the United States that wouldn't benefit by more energy efficiency. We need an all-in approach to cultural organizations. And so what I'm proposing is that we develop a compact, a relationship between funders and cultural organizations so that they can do the energy retrofits, the energy innovation, but not just do the energy innovations. That it's important, but by itself insufficient. They also need to be proposing plans for how they would tell their stories to their audiences about why acting climate change is important, why they did what they did, and to encourage their public to also engage in greater, more aggressive climate action and justice. Because imagine the economic, employment, environmental, education, and equity opportunities if energy innovative cultural institutions in the United States weren't rare, but commonplace. So let's turn imagination into reality, and I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues and with any of you to make imagination into reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Jen Kretzer. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives for the Wild Center. We are a science museum in upstate New York. in the Adirondack Park, and our mission is to ignite an enduring passion for the Adirondacks where people and nature can thrive together and offer an example for the world. I'm really thrilled to be here today on this panel as part of representing cultural institutions doing and accelerating climate action in the United States. We do need a better plan to be all in, and I feel one of the ways that we can do that is through the way in which we engage in public participation, education, and awareness. And that's really through Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, which is part of the Paris Agreement and Article 6 in the Convention. And this work we are already doing as a sector. We already provide incredible education opportunities, not just for young people, but for all levels of society. We work on training, both internally in our pathways that we provide for young people, professionals. We offer opportunities and job trainings for people outside of our institutions. We have opportunities to raise public awareness, and as Pat alluded to, the public trust that exists in informal institutions, particularly in science centers, lends an opportunity to help bring people together, to find common dialogue, and to meet the moment now, which is where what we need to do. We also provide an opportunity to coordinate networks. Many of our institutions have incredible partnerships across our communities, connecting with those that are most vulnerable, connecting in schools, providing critical services and needs. We saw this during the COVID pandemic when museums turned themselves into vaccination centers, into places to get food, into all kinds of ways to serve their community, and we can do that again and now during the climate crisis. We also provide an incredible opportunity for public participation and learning around not just science, but civics and justice. I want to share a few of the programs that we do at the Wild Center as examples of ways in which museums can operate through ACE and accelerate public participation, education, and awareness. One of those programs started in 2009. It's our Youth Climate Program. This program works to convene young people around climate change, science, civics, education, and action, and bring that energy back to their schools and communities to create opportunities for learning and advancement and to help build climate resilience. Our summits pull young people together. We have workshops and plenary sessions, artists, business leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, young people, opportunities for leadership and growth development, and it culminates in a climate action plan that these young people can bring back to their schools and communities. We've been incredibly successful in building this summit network. We have close to 100 summits in 6 different countries and offer a whole array of materials on our website that you can download for free, and we can help you get a summit started where you are. I wanted to also share that some of the climate action plans that we are putting into play, or that the students, young people are leading, are helping to build that climate action in communities. They're helping to take and have conversations with leaders and decision makers and influence their communities' direction in their climate action planning and to build resilience. They're also engaging in bringing people together across the political divide. They're helping, particularly in rural areas, to kind of help people see solutions and see opportunities that they can make visible in those communities, and to help, particularly coming from a rural community, find ways to listen better and deeper to each other, to find a common ground, and to advance climate resilience. A couple other ways in which our program and our museum are bringing people together is through our convening work. So our convening work centers around, again, creating dialogues between people coming from very different perspectives, and typically reaches audiences not often reached in the museum sector. In this case, Building a Greener Adirondacks is an event we hold every other year at our institution, where we bring together builders, architects, planners, and others to learn about sustainable building design and best best practices. This is a way to reach out to audiences that typically don't utilize our museum, but also to turn our museum over to the community, to give them the space, the resources that science museums and other informal institutions just have in their buildings to convene important conversations and to learn from each other. Finally, I'd like to mention that we had another convening opportunity that we've done is around after a natural disaster. So when Hurricane Irene hit in northern New York in 2011, we brought together planners and Department of Transportation. Communities were very heavily hit. They were actually cut off from emergency services, and we felt we had the opportunity there to meet communities where they were, and what they needed was an opportunity to share stories, to learn from each other, and to think about how they can build back better, honestly. So we're excited about the work that is here. I really wanted to just emphasize, though, that museums, as Pat and Sarah both mentioned, have such an incredible opportunity to be both anchors and catalysts in their communities to build a better and more resilient and just future. If we can think about museums in that way, we can think about them as sort of those anchor stars in constellations, and we want to build constellations across our nation, and that will help accelerate to a just transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Let's see. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Let's see. I'm Richard Piacentini. I'm the president and CEO of Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Just a visual here to show you where we're located. We're in the Northeast United States. Our original conservatory opened in 1893, but it's not until about the last 15 or 20 years that we've really started to initiate our green agenda. And I just want to share some key highlights with you over that time. A couple of examples. In 2005, we switched to 100% renewable energy to power our entire campus. In 2006, we got rid of all the plastic disposables in our cafe. In 2009, we stopped selling bottled water. In 2010, we started to offset all the carbon we produce for heating all of our buildings. In 2015, we divested from fossil fuels from all of our investments, and in 2017, we adopted a broad ESG program for all of our investments. And then in 2019, we switched our cafes so that it's greater than 70% of our cafe items are vegan and vegetarian. During that time, over the last, let's say, 9 years, we've also built 3 zero-energy buildings representing new construction, modular construction, and adaptive reuse. The reason I mention that is because I think it's really important for institutions like ours to lead by example if we want to start to engage the public. And I think we've been very successful in some of the programs we've been using to start to engage the public to start taking green initiatives on their own. One of our examples is the Green Power Drive that we started a couple of years ago, where we made an arrangement with a green power provider where we sell them bulk memberships at a discount that they can then use as incentives to encourage people to switch to green electricity. Over a course of 3 years, we had 5,500 families switch to their power to green electricity, which we think was really great. That is equivalent to not burning 77,000 barrels of oil each year. And that's one of the key things that I think that made this program successful, was to help people understand visually what the problem is. A lot of times we talk about tons of carbon dioxide. Who knows what a ton of carbon dioxide looks like? Nobody, right? Well, the typical Pennsylvania household produces about 8 tons of carbon dioxide each year to power their homes. That's equivalent to burning about 16 barrels of oil. So we lined our front walkway with 16 oil barrels to demonstrate to people this is the problem. This is what you can solve if you switch to green renewable energy. And it's been very successful. We then used that opportunity to start to work with other gardens and museums around the country to help them ramp up their aggressive actions to address climate change. So we started the Climate Toolkit. The idea here is for people, organizations, to recognize where does it make the most sense that they can take action to address climate change. they have to agree to share that information with other museums and gardens and zoos. They then have to agree to be a mentor for anybody who wants to learn from them, and then use this as an opportunity to learn from each other. We have 29 different goals in 9 different sector areas representing things like energy, water, transportation, and food service. And so far, we've had 40 different institutions sign on to the toolkit, and we're hoping to really ramp that up aggressively this next year. Because I think, as was mentioned by some of my colleagues, I think Pat mentioned this, each year hundreds of millions of visitors visit our institutions each year. What an incredible opportunity to engage them in adopting green initiatives, but not only to adopt green initiatives, how about creating a groundswell of support for broad environmental action as well? The climate change problem is not going to be solved with a top-down or a bottom-only approach. It's going to take both working together. And I think the cultural organizations could provide the groundswell of support that's going to be necessary for brave leaders and politicians and governments to take action. It's going to take both working together, and I think we can do a great job in helping to support that effort. So thank you very much.
Great museum work fosters empathy, curiosity, and creativity. I helped write this quote, so I'm going to edit it a little bit. It requires courage that enables humans to understand challenges and be moved to overcome them in ways that expand well-being for everything around us. Our museums already share our knowledge and our resources. Now we must offer these in support of improved solutions and new approaches. The cultural sector is charitable, educational, mission-driven, and community-focused. We have skills and abilities in public engagement, communication, research, and knowledge creation that we can use in the climate fight. We are ready to partner in all of our communities, regionally, nationally, with businesses, investors, governments, researchers, social agencies, cooperatively advance climate action. So I'm hoping that whether you're a cultural institution or an investor or a company or the mayor of Seattle, that you will find cultural institutions and other partners in your community, near your home, your place of work, that align with your personal or professional mission. Find them, the ones that will be your new climate action partner, and use them for demonstrating promising technology, practices, public engagement, or citizen science. In 2017, when President Trump stepped out of the Paris Agreement, it seemed to me that those of us who care about this work would still do it. We'd do it wherever we could find that option. On that day, I called about 10 of my professional friends. These are 3 of them. And I said, would you still do this work even if the federal government isn't supporting it? They said yes. We had a good group that said yes. At the same time, people in the other sectors are thinking about this. 5 days later, I hear that there's something called America is All In. But it's formed with only part of the civil sector. It doesn't have culture, health, and education. It doesn't have culture, health, and education as part of it. And so I started knocking on the door. And thank goodness, Alon Strait, who was our leader at the time, who we had to share with the State Department now, heard that message. And he said, yes, we need that extra layer. And by 2018, those 3 new sectors were added to We Are Still In. That has given us an opportunity to really leverage the work that you're hearing about today. It was started before then, but it's really been able to accelerate. We're proud of that work, and I'm thankful to all 3 of you for saying yes early on. So you can reach out with your partners and co-create a plan for climate action. I hope you'll find them, and then I hope you'll contact all of us and tell us about the partnerships you've created and the work that you're doing. So we can take some questions now, and I also have some questions for panelists if they'd like it. Yes, sir, in the back.
Well, the question was the timeline that I showed of all the things we did. They asked why renewable energy was the first thing that we did. Well, that was actually a result of our building one of the first LEED certified buildings. One of the requirements for LEED at that time, I think, was we had to use 20% renewable energy in the building. We said, okay, this is for our Welcome Center. We said, why stop with 20%? Let's do 100%. Why stop with just this building? Let's do our whole campus. And it just made sense for us to do that, and we just decided to adopt that.
Any other questions? People want to tell us about what cultural institutions in their communities are doing? Oh, I'll hand it to you.
Hi, thank you. Just a question for all the panelists. Curious about any discussions that you guys have had. Energy efficiency is great and for sure a definite part of the solution. But when you look at the energy that you're taking in, has there been any discussion? I know maybe some of you have signed power purchase agreements, or some of you have on-site generation, although I'm sure when it's cloudy or snowy or whatnot, you turn to something else. So in terms of the energy being consumed, what are those discussions like, and what are you guys seeing as a kind of silver bullet to a lot of your decarbonization efforts in the future?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So first of all, I think energy efficiency is where cultural institutions should go to first, like any building owner or operator, because that is, I think, oftentimes the lowest hanging fruit. And that's why we did that advanced heat recovery project, which automatically cut our carbon budget by 30% and reduced our purchases of hot water by 65%. And we have continued to look for opportunities for energy efficiency. As a result, the Science Museum's use of electricity has dropped every year in a row for the last 11 years. But to your point, we always are going to need to purchase electricity to heat, cool, and power the Science Museum. So in March of this year, the Science Museum actually signed a subscription agreement with our electric utility for 100% wind-generated electricity as a part of our way of dropping our carbon budget. Science Museum committed to carbon neutrality in 2019. Our goal was to cut carbon emissions by at least 50% by 2030 and get to carbon neutrality by 2050. But just by signing that subscription agreement, we reached our 50% reduction goal 9 years early. So I think that energy efficiency and renewable energy are closely intertwined with cultural institutions.
Three of the buildings that I showed in this, the screen shot that I showed before are zero energy buildings, and all three of those buildings were designed to meet the Living Building Challenge, which is the most rigorous green building standard in the world. And the requirement for the Living Building Challenge is that all those buildings have to be powered with on-site produced energy. So those three buildings are all solar powered with all the solar panels located on the site. For the rest of our campus, we do purchase renewable energy credits for the rest of our electrical needs. And we're in the process right now of negotiating a direct power agreement with a new solar field that's being developed nearby our campus. Yes. Yes.
I'm curious if you could expand upon cultural institutions' role in meeting the challenges around climate justice in our communities.
Thanks, Sarah, for that question. I feel like that museums, one, cultural institutions have a moral obligation to be part of the solution, period. Like that needs to happen, and it needs to happen like right now. And I also feel like that museums have the opportunity to reach out and convene with community leaders, like go out into community and do deep listening around what those community needs are and how that and what they can do to help serve those needs. I know there's a lot of work. We're a part of Aztec, the Association for Science and Technology Centers, and they're doing a lot of work thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion in museums, as well as sort of approaching it from this community science frame that really looks at how we're in community, working with community, listening to community, and that is the way that we are going to help build and center justice in our institutions. And I mean, we have deep work to do internally. There's no question about it in our sector, but we have to go out into our communities and really deeply listen in order for that transformation to happen.
The Science Museum's climate change work is actually headquartered in our Science, Equity, and Education division of the museum. So that is responsible for not only our climate science, but also all of our equity and inclusion initiatives. And so the work that we're doing right now is integrating those two. The Science Museum adopted a new climate change statement back in March of this year, which is much more action-oriented, explicitly calls out equity and climate justice as something that the museum needs to actively engage on, and also states that every year the Science Museum will audit its work on climate change, and also not only audit its work, but also identify the work that it wants to do in the coming years, and then make that document publicly available. I encourage all cultural institutions, whether they're art, historical, natural history, or science, to have an internal discussion about what do they see as their role working on climate change. Because no matter what kind of institution they are, there is work for them to do. There's some segment of this task that they can be involved in with their community.
Pat, would you tell them a little bit more about the Science Museum's process of going from your first climate statement to your second one and your plan now?
The Science Museum of Minnesota adopted its first climate change statement back in 2012. And at that time, it was 9 years ago, it was really a statement of scientific fact that the Science Museum of Minnesota had looked over the scientific evidence and concurred with the conclusion of a vast number of scientists that human-caused climate change was real and it was an imminent threat. 9 years later, there's a whole lot more science. Climate change has become highly evident to everyone. And so we felt the need to update and revise and put it in place a new climate change statement. So this statement, which is easily found on our website if you just Google Science Museum of Minnesota climate change, is much more action-oriented. And the reason for it was we wanted to go beyond the fact that this is a scientific consensus to the fact that we now need all of society engagement on addressing this issue. And here were the ways that the Science Museum envisioned it being part of an all-in-society approach to tackling this problem.
By the numbers, this is how big the cultural sector is. Zoos, museums, gardens, historic sites. It doesn't count hundreds of thousands of libraries, and it doesn't count theaters and symphony halls and things like that. If we put all of those together and use them for public engagement and direct climate action, think of the difference we could make. Before COVID, more people visited cultural institutions than went to professional sporting events. That's 800 million people going through getting our message if we talk about climate change. And the data is in that we are the most trusted resource on this work. And why not use that platform? If the government can't be trusted by enough of the audience as we'd like, but we can. That gives us an opportunity to send a message that leadership won't be able to. That gives us a platform that leadership needs. We need the support of leadership in order to take more action. That's the whole premise behind America is All In, is that we are a partner to federal government in order to support them and push them in a direction that will lead to wider climate action across the country. Are there any more questions? We have a little more time, so I have something I wanted to plant with all of them. Oh, we do? I'm sorry.
Thank you. My name is Umar Saleh Anka from Nigeria, representing HCRFF. The question is, what plan do you have for Africa? Because we strongly believe in US and its power. Once, by the time that United States of America backed out of the promise, everybody was like, something is going to be wrong somewhere. But we are glad that we are back. You are back on track. So, do you have any plan for Africans, as because we are the worst hit by the climate change effect? We know it's a local climate change start locally, but it's global. It has a global effect. So, what do you have for us to cover yourself from Africans rushing back, going to America for greener pasture? So I think we need to address this issue. It's not everybody that wants to leave the country. We are in there, we are not going anywhere. So what do you have for us? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that's where the cultural heritage sector shines. In the United States, the cultural heritage sector is indigenous populations, it's historic structures, it's archaeological sites, it's coastal locations that are ancient to just recent history. And the process of caring for, understanding that resource for us is something that has begun to teach us more about the experience of forced migration, the experience of losing your heritage, losing places that you care about, places that are important to you. And I think that falls into the realm of what I would call climate diplomacy. When you can't have a conversation where you agree on carbon credits or carbon reductions, we can all agree that our heritage matters to us, wherever we come from, wherever we live, and that protecting it is a common value across all of the nations. So coming to some sort of agreements in which we all invest to how to reduce the global impacts on climate will help protect the entire globe and all of that cultural heritage. Now, the United States cultural heritage sector has a lot of resources on risk assessment, risk abatement, and protection. Our responsibility is to share that well. So the American Institute for Conservation is a partner with the International Institute for Conservation, and an acronym I can't quite translate, ICCROM, I-C-C-R-O-M, on what are the cultural heritage aspects and resources we have that we can share around the world. And so ICCROM has a tool called Our Collections Matter, which is really a single location for a toolkit for what are the sorts of cultural heritage protection approaches that we can take around the world, wherever the setting is. And what we're learning, of course, America is sometimes slow on this, is that there is so much to learn from the indigenous cultures and the way of life and approach to managing resources. Here in the United States, what we now call the United States, but around the world, that we need to learn those lessons and then share what we've learned and shared that back out. So there's what I would call a shadow IPCC, and it's for the Cultural Heritage Network. It'll be meeting during the first few days of December. There are 100 of us cultural heritage folks who are talking about, around the globe, what is the role of cultural heritage in climate action and preparation for climate change, and how together can we support each other in making progress where the federal government can't or won't step in. So you do have allies in the cultural heritage sector. That's what I can offer you. Yeah. Anyone?
When the previous administration decided to pull out of the Paris Agreement, I think a lot of people around the world interpreted that as the United States was withdrawing from active work on climate change. What it meant was the federal government, particularly the executive branch, was becoming inactive on climate change. But work on climate change continued throughout the previous administration. And I'll give one small example from my state of Minnesota. The previous administration was gung-ho on increasing the amount of coal burned in the United States. It didn't want to reduce coal, it wanted to increase the burning of coal. Exactly the opposite has happened in the United States, and it happened during his administration. Countless coal-burning power plants across the United States have been closed or are scheduled to be closed. Every coal-fired power plant in the state of Minnesota will be shuttered by the year 2035 at the latest. So that is progress, and that happened despite the efforts of the previous administration to counteract it.
Yeah, I just had another comment regarding thinking about the role of museums in this sector, and one of the things I wanted to mention was just the ability for museums to amplify and communicate and to really lift up and elevate voices that haven't been heard. I mean, thinking, and thank you for sharing the statistics, Sarah. You know, if we think about like the ability for our sector to come together and help to and commit to amplifying, lifting up voices, particularly of people that are being impacted by climate change disproportionately, like that's an incredible, incredible opportunity. I also think that there's opportunities for museums to sort of think about who is the authority and how do we share authority as institutions. For example, our museum has been working closely with the Haudenosaunee community over the last 6 years to help transform sections of our museums, literally hand that over and help let them tell their story, whatever that looks like, and building those relationships and thinking about how we continue to find spaces in our institutions and in our communities to help elevate and communicate and to make sure that everyone is included and that those voices are also at the table is absolutely critical, and we need it to happen now.
I'd just like to go back and refer you to the climatetoolkit.org. The idea behind that is everyone can do something. And, you know, by putting out there what you're doing and being willing to share that with other organizations, they might be able to learn something that they could do in their own institutions as well. So the more we can share, the more we can learn, I think the better off we'll all be.
Any other questions? Okay, to our panelists. So, you've shared with us today, and this whole COP is about the steps we all need to take on climate. Today we're planting the flag and letting everyone know that we're all working hard and that we all want to create strong partnerships for climate action. So where do you each think that the cultural sector should go next? What should we do next, and how will you push it forward?
Well, I think the cultural sector, particularly the professional organizations that represent the cultural sector in the United States, the Association of Science and Technology Centers, the Alliance for American Museums, I think there's an opportunity there for these organizations to say that their institutions, their membership want to work on climate change, and they're looking for a partnership, federal partnership, philanthropic partnerships to help accelerate the opportunity for museums to engage their audiences on climate change. There is, as Sarah has pointed out, an enormous sector that has enormous influence with large populations of the United States that could be showcases for climate innovation, for climate action and justice. And I think it's important for our professional organizations to articulate the desire for the cross-sectoral community in the United States to actively mobilize on climate change.
Thanks, Pat. I believe that the next step for museums is to make our cultural sector is to really make a commitment to decarbonization. So step one, like with their buildings and their spaces, we should not be building institutions, cultural institutions, unless they are like achieving net zero. Like we really have to think about how we're changing the way that we build in our communities. I also really believe in the power of education, and that we need every institution to step up and think about how they're addressing climate change education, civic engagement and literacy in their communities, and how they're also centering both youth and communities of color to make sure that their voices again are heard at the table, that they're elevate them, and that they're including them in all aspects of their decision making. I think that with that, we could really move on accelerating ACE for a just and sustainable world.
Thank you, Jen. You know, one of the things I think we really need to do is for our institutions to lead by example. If we want people to adopt more aggressive action in addressing climate change, then we need to show them that it's possible. I also think we need to change the story. You know, many years ago when the environmental movement got started, I think we were all led to believe that if you wanted to be green and do something sustainable, you have to give things up, that you're going to be uncomfortable, so you might as well just get over with it. You're going to be miserable. Nobody aspires to be uncomfortable. We have to show people that it's better. The building that I showed in one of my pictures before, the Center for Sustainable Landscapes, is a Living Building Challenge building. Zero water, zero energy building, free from toxic chemicals. It's a much, much better building than any other building I've ever been in. That's what we need to show people, that actually the grass is greener on the other side, that we could build buildings, we could have a lifestyle that are better than we enjoy now and still be respect the planet and do something that's good for our health and good for the planet.
I'll close this out by saying that cultural institutions can help create a world where everyone and everything can thrive. And we hope that you will help us do this and that you will do it with partners in your community. Thanks very much.